Whoa, what an amazing coincidence. The other day I was watching a quiz show on TV called The Chase, and this was an up-to-date episode. One of the contestants on that show mentioned that she'd been on another quiz show called Mastermind. Now, it just so happens that I've been going back and watching older episodes of this show, Mastermind. I didn't watch them at the time they were originally broadcast, but they're available to watch online. So, immediately after watching this new episode of The Chase, I went back and watched an old episode of Mastermind. It was the next one in the series that I'd been watching. It was about 2 years old. And yes, I'm sure you've guessed, it was the very episode that this woman had appeared on. Whoa, spooky, right? The Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung came up with a word for this kind of phenomenon: synchronicity. It's basically used to describe events that coincide in time and appear meaningfully related in some way, but they lack any discoverable causal connection. Obviously, the coincidence in time is important here, but more important is this seeming relatedness of events that are in no way causally connected. Obviously, events happen at the same time as other events all the time. But a few of these seem spookily connected in some way, and this gives rise in us to feelings, maybe a slight frisson. How weird is that, we might say? Jung wrote a book on the topic in 1960, which he called simply Synchronicity. In that book, he gives a few examples. Here's one of them. It's the one most often quoted, and I'm quoting from the book here. By way of example, I shall mention an incident from my own observation. A young woman I was treating had, at that critical moment, a dream in which she was given a golden scarab. While she was telling me this dream, I sat with my back to the closed window. Suddenly I heard a noise behind me, like a gentle tapping. I turned around and saw a flying insect knocking against the window pane from outside. I opened the window and caught the creature in the air as it flew in. It was the nearest analogy to a golden scarab that one finds in our latitudes, a scarabaeid beetle, the common rose chafer, Cattonia aurata, which, contrary to its usual habits, had evidently felt an urge to get into a dark room at this particular moment. He goes on to say that this particular woman that he was treating needed something quite irrational to break her out of the Cartesian framework in which she was stuck. Now, Jung himself has a tendency to see something paranormal in these experiences, as you can see, I think, hinted in that last sentence that I quoted from the book, describing the beetle as acting contrary to its usual habits, as if something had mysteriously influenced it in some way. There are in fact 35,000 species of scarabaeid beetles in the world, about 10% of all beetle species. As Jung himself points out, this particular beetle, the rose chafer, is very common. It may well be that beetles of this species had been bumping into his window several times a day for weeks, but he noticed this one in particular because of the context in which it occurred. So I would suggest that what changed here was not the normal course of events in the external world, but Jung's perception. I would suggest that Jung's comment that this was contrary to the beetle's usual habits is a bit of creative fiction. These things are going to happen, and sometimes they'll be much closer to being spooky than Jung's often cited example, which I've used here. I think these things also have a tendency to become somewhat more spooky in the telling. You'll probably be able to give me an example from your own life that was particularly significant for you. Someone turning up at just the right moment, that kind of thing. Look, I've probably heard all of these things, and I've probably had many of these experiences myself. I acknowledge that these experiences can indeed seem spooky. They can indeed elicit an emotional response from us. What they don't do for me, though, is shape my worldview. I don't read actual meaning into them, though I can see how easy it would be to do that. One of the reasons I don't is because I don't think the world could actually function the way it does if these things actually had meaning, if they occurred in a purposeful way rather than just by chance. See, this would imply that there was some force operating on cause and effect, and probably a long way back in the chain of cause and effect too, if we were to interpret these events as having been shaped specifically for us at this time and place, in order to convey some kind of message to us. The world would be very unreliable and science would be virtually impossible if the world worked in this way, if some force stepped in from time to time to mess with cause and effect. Often it's the specific context that makes us notice something that we wouldn't otherwise notice, as in the example Jung gives us. I remember when I was a boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, that I became momentarily obsessed with the mini minor. I was still living in the UK at that time, and whatever the reason was for this particular obsession, after it took hold on me, I saw mini minors everywhere. Prior to this obsession, I wouldn't have noticed them at all. I think we can agree, can't we, that what changed was my perception. There was not suddenly a mysterious proliferation of such vehicles on the road, and a whole bunch of cars didn't just suddenly pop into existence, nor was there an abnormal surge in the sale of such cars. What changed was my perception. I think it's the same with many of these instances of synchronicity. That's not to say that such an experience can't be used by us in some way, just as Jung used the experience of the beetle to unlock something that was going on in his patient's mind. And maybe we can use these events ourselves in some way, maybe to investigate our own psychological processes. What's going on within me that made me notice this at this particular time? Not, except in an entirely metaphorical way, what is the universe trying to show me? Many people will use such experiences to reinforce their religious beliefs, even if it's just this kind of vague personification of the universe that can somehow communicate with me. They'll use such experiences to point to the operation of God or the Holy Spirit in their lives. Most of these experiences, though, are completely trivial. What could possibly be the meaning of seeing this woman on the chase and then immediately afterwards on a 2-year-old episode of Mastermind? Maybe it's a message to me from the universe to go on one or both of these shows. On the other hand, she did lose on both of the shows, so maybe it's a message urging me not to go on either show. Yeah, since I actually have no intention of ever going on either of these shows, I'll take that second option. The message can be anything I want it to be, or nothing at all. See if you can be creative in the comments below and suggest some other possible meanings for me in this event. What is its actual meaning for me, though? Well, for me it demonstrates that such synchronous events mean nothing at all. They're just coincidences. Any meaning we find in them, we put there ourselves. Oh, plus it gave me something to talk about today.